So this is a short presentation on ideas really of engaging students with their material through use of TEL. Not so much using TEL just as a teaching tool, but a way of complementing traditional teaching methods and combining the two in order to give a better student experience, both in terms of experiential and learning. And of course, very important, though I'll come on to it in a bit, just a dab of fear. So when we talk about engagement, what is it that we want? What are we talking about? There's obviously increased expectations from us as well as them nowadays, what with increased fees and their increased awareness of policies and rules and the way that the university works. So we're really talking about things like reading your notes rather than just showing up to the lectures, making sure that you understand your assignments by reading around the material and accessing the material that we make available online. Knowing when things are by looking at timetables online rather than relying on screenshots of your timetable at the beginning of the year. And more in-depth things such as don't just follow the method in a practical session or a clinical session. Consider why you're following this method. What are some of the things that could go wrong that might help you understand the material better? The issue, of course, with this is lectures are quite often spread out considerably. Usually it's a week, maybe 2 weeks in between lectures, depending on whether you have practicals and clinical sessions or not. So really there's huge gaps between them. Often you'll have day one, there'll be the lecture, and then they'll have another module, which of course we don't really consider in this, that we may have to teach a lot in one area, whereas they have to take in a lot of information from a lot of different fields. Then of course they've got social lives to contend with, other modules, the weekend, relaxing. And so it's our job really to make sure that we are able to retain their attention, retain their presence, and relate one lecture to the next so that they don't just treat them as separate fortnights or separate weeks, so that they treat things as one continuous story. Now, we do actually have a platform for implementing TEL, though sometimes it is somewhat underused. This, of course, is the virtual learning platform Blackboard, which is accessible across the university. It's used worldwide and is very popular. And at its minimum, it could be used as, and often is, a repository of information. So it's where people dump their lectures in order for the students to be able to access them. And the consideration here is, I'm using TEL, I'm giving the students more than just the lecture because I'm putting the PowerPoint up on Blackboard. And so Blackboard could look something like this, kind of a Library of Alexandria. But more often than not, what it actually looks like is something more like this. So boxes in disarray, no idea what's in which box, where the files are, how things are organized, what is the filing system here. And this is just down to lack of awareness of what Blackboard is capable of, the assumption that because people complain about it, it must be rubbish. And the often used reason for not being able to do things is not having the time to learn how to use Blackboard. So the trick really in implementing TEL as an engagement strategy is to think like that. Do you want to be able to find something easily? Do you want to know what you're looking at? Do you want to know why you're looking at it? You've got to think the way that they do. When you Google something, you expect to be returned with relevant images, relevant web pages. Do you get annoyed at not being able to find relevant web pages on the UI site? You find that you actually often go to Google and type your search string and put UI on the end rather than use the UI search engine. And do you want to feel like there's someone out there that cares about what you're doing and why? You know, you don't want an invisible lecturer who delivers the lecture, leaves the room, and you never see them again and they don't know who you are. And of course, do you enjoy reading endless bullet points? If you deliver your lectures in this way with just endless bullet points on the screen, if you don't like reading that, why should the students enjoy reading that? So maybe don't be the guy who just puts words up on the screen and reads off the screen, and when you're turning them into TEL tools, TEL accessible material, don't just put information on the screen. You have to make it engaging and interacting. And so this is the kind of the thing that students like, from what I've gathered through feedback. When they go onto Blackboard, they want a pleasant welcome. So here, for instance, there's a banner of what the module is, Anatomy and Physiology, which I created. And this is present on all the iterations of the Anatomy and Physiology module, depending on the program, with slight differences. So the pre-med, for example, has slightly different pictures so that they know what they're looking at. We've got a welcome video down here. And this is a way for the students to see who the module leader is, which is myself in this instance. They learn a little bit about what the module will involve, a little bit about the assignments, and they have a face in order to associate their learning with. Then, of course, on the far side in the menu section here, it's color coordinated, and this matches what I have deemed the web page interface, which instead of the Blackboard folder structure and file listing format, I created a web page in order to populate it with all the material they need, practical handouts, lectures, etc. And this is what it looks like. So this is kind of a one-stop shop. They have access to the lectures and the corresponding practicals in week order. The bar at the top here has links to various parts of the UE website, including the staff profiles of those for this module, and buttons for additional resources and assignment material as it becomes made available. And of course, we still have the same banner picture up here, so they know they're looking at the web page interface for this particular module. The problem with this is, as fantastic as it is, and as much as the students say they prefer it to the normal way, or those that have used it at least, I'm the only one that knows how to use it. I'm the only one that knows at least how to edit the web page. And you can't expect a module team to do everything you say just because you reckon it's a good idea. So as much as I love using this, I'm having to come up with new ways of rearranging Blackboard in its traditional format in order to make it accessible for staff, less effort for staff, and a good student experience in terms of them finding the information they're looking for and know why they're finding it and getting the most out of it. But of course, it's not just about the way that we host the material, it's all about what the material is as well. So interactive lectures are very important with this. You try to make your lectures as interactive as possible when you're giving them. And what you want to do is take concepts and get them thinking instead of memorizing what they're doing. So you don't just want them to be able to repeat facts. You want them to take things a step further, particularly at level 3, when you want them to read around the subject. You want them to understand the core material so they can apply it to research and clinical and theoretical situations. I tend to include things such as audio snippets. So in the live lecture, if I spent several minutes talking about a particular slide, unless they've made incredibly detailed notes or they've recorded my voice, they're not going to get that same context, that same depth when they go back to look at a PowerPoint. And so I add audio snippets after the fact, explaining some of the more complex processes, including questions throughout in the same way that you often throw questions out to the audience, to the students, and no one ever says anything. If you put touch button questions, multiple choice, things for them to consider before revealing the answer for themselves, it gives them something to do and it gives them direction. Another important feature is to give them direction, is to send them on a particular path. As you go through the lecture, you go slide to slide in the order of the story that you're trying to tell. What you don't really want them to do in looking at a PowerPoint you've made available is just for them to willy-nilly jump whatever slide they want, because they're not really going to understand how the different slides relate to one another. So here's an example of a slide with something to do and with direction and with questions and things for them to consider. So this is talking about how there are different ways of rotating an individual relevant to or relative to anatomical base. And so here the student clicks on the man, he is turned onto his back, and it comes up telling the student what that position is. In this case, it's supine, so thrown backwards. And instead of me just telling them supine is on the back, there's a visual thing and there's something to do. If we click on him again, we're shown the reverse position, which is prone or inclined towards, so lying on their front. And all of a sudden, we have the reveal of a button for them to click, which brings up just some additional information to get them really thinking about what it is. You can now see that this button has turned into a kind of greeny gold, and that draws their attention to it so that they know to click it again. And this now brings up a question. So now that we've been through what prone and supine are, in order for them to understand what the terms mean, we've got a multiple choice question here. And of course, someone that is accident prone and has little accidents, more likely to trip, more open to attack. And you're more open to attack when you are face forward, when you can't see your attacker coming. And so prone is the correct term. In terms of looking at the skeleton, here we've got just ways of toggling visual features on and off. So the axial skeleton, for instance, is the purple section here. It tells you how many bones, and it gives you a general idea as to what it's for. If they then click on appendicular, the axial skeleton turns off, and the appendicular skeleton turns on. So there's no chance of the student getting confused or trying to figure out which is which. And you can see here, no matter which one I toggle, I can turn them on and off. Formative assessment is a massive part of what I try to do online. I use what's called Flash or HTML5 conversion software. The HTML5 version actually allows me to create material that will work on all devices: Apple, iPads, Android phones. Flash works on most things, but it doesn't work on Apple devices. And of course, students have more access to iPads, and their tablets of choice tend to be iPads nowadays. And we can't really prevent them from doing revision online at home simply because they've bought an iPad and we don't support it in terms of our IT provision. And so by generating TEL materials that work on Apple devices, we're able to expand the amount of accessibility that students have. And this is an example of several formative assessments I make available that feed into the Grade Centre on Blackboard, and students can do them in their own time just for fun. And they do things like matching up pairs, writing in words, writing in answers, multiple choice. My favourite type of question, anatomical spot or spot question, where they have to identify a structure in a picture, in this case to identify the coracoid process. And so you click on the picture and drag the hotspot that appears into the correct location and submit the question. And because this feeds into the Grade Centre, I'm able to see how the students are doing individually and as a class as a whole, so that I know if there is something in the next lecture I deliver that maybe we should go over from the previous one because most of the class failed the quiz or just didn't do that well. It also helps them to identify their strengths and weaknesses so they know which material they should revise more frequently and which notes maybe they need to expand on. My hope is actually that I can use this as a more summative assessment. I did this January with 2 modules. It worked very well. There are some teething problems, and of course you want to make sure these are as robust as possible, but it could actually potentially cut down on a huge amount of marking, particularly at levels 1 and 2, where we still rely often on OMR sheets and short answer questions, because the question types in these online assessments are quite rigorous, they're quite varied, they're interactive, they get the students thinking without just providing them with the correct answer and 4 potential wrong answers. So it is actually almost better than short answer questions at level 2 that just require a sentence or 2, and it can draw that understanding out of the students. So it's my hope to test this further and publish the material, obviously, in order to spread the ideas further if it works. The fear, of course. This is, as I mentioned, the formative quizzes I do feed into the Grade Centre, and I make the students aware of this. I tell them that I know who's getting what score. I tell them who's attempted the quizzes, how long they took, what answers they put specifically, so I can answer any questions. I also can do course reports, so I know who's even been on the module page, and it can tell me and tell them if they've not been on for a certain number of days, say 5 days or 20 days, it will alert me to that fact. And so because the students know that essentially I am watching, they tend to engage more because they know that someone's looking out for them as well as keeping an eye on them. So they know that there's no point in coming to me complaining they don't understand something if I know they haven't bothered to access the online material. And so by having this minor fear that I know what's going on and that the wool can't be pulled over my eyes, they tend to be a lot more open in what they are and are not doing. And they tend to be far more engaging, both in class as well as online, when they know that you've gone to this additional effort to provide resources for them. They tend to be more approachable to you in the classes. The trick, of course, is it's a blend. It's a blend of traditional materials and online materials. I couldn't personally give up the traditional lecturing style. I love it too much. So I try to use TEL resources as a way of enhancing their learning experience, of complementing the traditional teaching already in place. You want to employ Lazy's law, really, that's what I call it. I would go with Moore's law, but unfortunately that's already taken. So Lazy's law is that when someone asks me to do something or to take over something, I usually look at it, and if it looks like a lot of work, I think there has got to be a better way of doing this. There's got to be a better way of doing this that is efficient and yet doesn't go against the students, doesn't take away from their experience and take away from their learning. And so that's how I come up with these various ways of automating most of what I do, so that once I spend a bit of time doing it initially, I never have to worry about it again unless I want to enhance it or edit it in some way. So a couple of hours in the summer on Blackboard, and I've set up my entire module for the year so that everything is on time release, and I don't have to worry about lectures going up late. And of course, you have to engage with them. You can't just make the online stuff and say, well, now I'm giving them even more, because you can't be an invisible academic. Not to say that, of course, there are a lot of invisible academics, but we're here for them is our kind of primary role in teaching. And so I try to know as many of my students as possible. And this is just a sampling of the 450 or so that I have in levels 1 and 2. And I know most of the names and faces. I know enough about them to converse with them in the lab so that they come to me and ask me questions and they know that I'll listen. And it really helps in getting feedback from them as to which online materials are working and which aren't. They contact me to let me know what physically isn't working, if something hasn't uploaded, or if links aren't working, and they make suggestions and things. I've had students, one in particular asked me if they can, if I could create a small version of one of my lectures so that it's safe and secure in order for them to demonstrate it to a school that they work at part-time, in order to give them more anatomy information. And this was actually really helpful for them. It helped them understand the material better, and it was a really good use of that online material. So that's all there is. Like I said, it's to complement, not replace, and it's really just trying to make their learning better and try to make my life easier by making things that are easier to do and easy to edit. You can find a lot of the tricks and things that I've done on Blackboard if you do a course search for Temp Chris Moore. There's a module there with guest access, and there's all number of screencasts you can access to find out how to do some of the things that I've done. They're not as complex as they seem, and they don't take as long as they might look like they do. So I hope you've enjoyed that and found it useful, and please feel free to email me at chris3.moore@ue.ac.uk, or come see me in my office 2C22 on Frenchy campus, or indeed link me whenever you like, and ask me anything you might be interested in. Okay, thank you very much.